I never thought putting on socks could leave me breathless, but here I was at 38 weeks pregnant, gasping like I'd run a marathon. The baby pressed against my ribs with each movement, and I had to pause, one hand on my belly, waiting for the dizziness to pass. From the kitchen came the sound of voices, my husband Marcus speaking in those soft, agreeable tones he used when he wanted to avoid conflict, and his mother Vivian's crisp instructions cutting through the air like a blade through silk. The apartment was mine. My grandmother's name was still on the lease downstairs, passed down to me when she died 3 years ago. But lately, every sound felt like permission being granted to someone else. Vivian had moved in to help, she said, the way some people say the weather is cold, a fact not up for discussion. A woman with steel in her spine and the certainty of someone who believes survival gave her authority over everyone around her. I eased myself to the edge of the bed, pressing both hands to my stomach as another wave of exhaustion hit. The voices from the kitchen grew louder. Marcus, you need to make sure she's eating properly. Vivian's voice carried down the hall. These young women today have no idea how to nourish themselves during pregnancy. In my day, we didn't have all these fancy prenatal vitamins and organic nonsense. We ate real food. She's doing fine, Mom, Marcus replied, but his voice lacked conviction. Fine? She's skin and bones everywhere except that belly. And yesterday I caught her napping at 2 in the afternoon. Lazy habits like that will ruin her night's sleep completely. I closed my eyes. 6 weeks. Vivian had been living in our second bedroom for 6 weeks, ever since my morning sickness returned in the 3rd trimester. She'd announced that a first-time mother shouldn't be left alone, especially one as delicate as me. Marcus had welcomed her with relief so obvious it made my chest ache. The bedroom door opened without a knock. Vivian stood there in her perfectly pressed blouse, her gray hair styled in the same way it had been for probably 20 years, her eyes scanning me from head to toe. "Still in your nightgown at 11 in the morning?" she asked, stepping into the room. "The baby needs you to be active, not lounging around like an invalid." "I was getting dressed," I said quietly, reaching for the maternity jeans folded on the chair. "Well, hurry up, I've made you a proper breakfast, liver and onions with spinach. Your iron levels need attention." She watched me struggle to pull the jeans over my belly. "And we need to discuss your birth plan. This idea of yours about a birthing center is ridiculous. You need to be in a hospital with proper medical staff." I had tried having this conversation with Marcus 3 times. Each time, he'd agreed with me initially, then, somehow by the end of the discussion, we were considering Vivian's suggestions instead. "The birthing center has qualified midwives," I said, buttoning my maternity shirt with fingers that trembled slightly. "My doctor thinks it's a good option." Vivian made a dismissive sound. "Your doctor is barely older than you are. Experience matters more than a piece of paper from medical school." After breakfast, a meal where I choked down metallic-tasting liver while Vivian lectured about proper nutrition, we prepared for my prenatal appointment. I put on my winter coat, a soft gray wool that had been my mother's. Vivian appeared at the door with her own coat, studying my outfit with the intensity of a fashion critic. "You're going out like that?" "Like what?" "Your stomach is completely on display. Those trains are drafty, and you'll catch something that could harm the baby." Marcus looked up from tying his shoes, glancing between his mother and me. I waited for him to defend my choice, to say that I looked fine. Instead, he gave me an apologetic smile and said, "Maybe Mom's right. It is pretty cold out there." I buttoned my coat higher and swallowed the sharp retort that rose in my throat. The subway platform was crowded with the usual mix of morning commuters and tourists. The train arrived with a screech of brakes, and we were swept inside by the momentum of bodies. I gripped the pole as the car lurched forward, my center of gravity completely off now that I was carrying an extra 30 pounds in front. A man near the end of the bench looked up from his phone, saw my belly, and immediately stood. "Here, take my seat," he said kindly. "Thank you," I managed, easing down with relief that spread through my swollen ankles like warm honey. Vivian remained standing, her eyes fixed on my seat with the calculating look of someone sizing up territory. She cleared her throat and spoke loud enough for the nearby passengers to hear. "Marcus, my knees really aren't what they used to be." My husband's eyes flicked between his mother's expectant face and mine. The train swayed, and several passengers reached for support bars. Marcus made his choice. He leaned down and touched my arm. "Mom's tired," he whispered. "Come on, be considerate." For a moment, the subway car fell silent around us despite the rumble of wheels on tracks. The man who had offered me the seat watched with growing disapproval. A woman by the door stiffened. I felt heat creep up my neck as every eye in our vicinity focused on this small drama. I looked at Marcus, searching his face for some sign that he understood what he was asking. I saw only the familiar expression of someone trying to keep peace by appeasing the person who complained the loudest. "I need this seat," I said quietly. "Just for a few stops," Marcus insisted, his grip tightening on my forearm. The pressure wasn't painful, but it was firm enough to make standing feel like the path of least resistance. I stood, my knees wobbling as another contraction of passengers pressed against me. Vivian settled into the seat with a theatrical sigh. "Thank you, dear," she said loudly. "At my age, you have to be practical about these things." I caught my reflection in the window and saw my face had gone pale. Across the aisle, a teenage girl stared at us with undisguised shock. The man who had originally offered the seat shook his head once, sharp and disgusted. The humiliation settled over me slowly, soaking into everything like cold rain. It wasn't about the seat. It was about the ritual of it. The way Marcus assumed I could be moved, the performance of frailty from a woman who was never weak when it gave her advantage. At the clinic, my blood pressure reading made the nurse frown. "This is higher than we'd like to see, doctor," Martinez said, studying my chart. "You need to prioritize rest. Stress isn't good for you or the baby at this stage." Before I could respond, Vivian leaned forward from her chair in the corner. "Nonsense. Young women today are coddled. I worked through both my pregnancies. We didn't have blood pressure monitors and special diets. We managed just fine." Dr. Martinez cleared her throat and addressed me directly. "Sarah, it's important that you listen to your body. If you're feeling overwhelmed, we need to address that." "She's not overwhelmed," Vivian interrupted. "She just needs to develop some backbone." I watched Marcus in my peripheral vision, waiting for him to speak up, to tell his mother that the doctor's opinion mattered more than her outdated beliefs. He rubbed the back of his neck and looked at the floor. Walking home from the clinic, I carried the printout of my test results folded in my pocket. Each step felt heavier than the last. When Marcus had sided with Vivian about the seat, when he'd pulled me to my feet in front of strangers, something had shifted inside me, a small crack that I could feel growing wider. That night, I lay in bed listening to the sounds of the city through our thin walls, one hand resting on my belly where the baby moved restlessly, as if she could sense my agitation. Marcus slept beside me, his breathing deep and untroubled. In the next room, Vivian's television played old movies at a volume that ensured no one could forget she was there. I thought about the woman who had lived in this apartment before me, my grandmother Rose, who had raised 3 children on her own after my grandfather died young. She had worked double shifts at the hospital, sent all her kids to college, and never let anyone tell her what she couldn't do. The framed photo of her on my dresser seemed to look at me with disappointment. 3 weeks later, I woke to a pain so sharp it took my breath away. It was 2 a.m, and the contraction wrapped around my back and abdomen like a vice. Too early, I thought. The baby wasn't due for another 2 weeks. "Marcus," I called out, my voice tight with pain. He stirred but didn't wake. Another contraction hit before the first had fully faded, and I gripped the edge of the mattress. "Marcus," I said louder, shaking his shoulder. He bolted upright, his hair sticking in all directions. "What's wrong?" "The baby's coming. We need to go to the hospital." Before he could respond, Vivian's voice pierced through the wall between our rooms. "Marcus, Marcus, I can't breathe." My husband froze, torn between his wife in labor and his mother's cries from the next room. Another contraction doubled me over. "Please," I gasped, reaching for his hand. "I need you." "Mom," he called toward the wall. "Just give me a minute." Vivian's voice grew more dramatic. "My chest, it's my heart, don't let me die alone." Panic overtook reason in Marcus's expression. He pulled his hand from mine and rushed toward his mother's room. I stared after him, stunned. The next contraction brought tears to my eyes, but they weren't just from physical pain. I fumbled for my phone with shaking hands and dialed 911. "I'm 38 weeks pregnant," I told the dispatcher between breaths. "The contractions are coming very fast. My husband, he's not available. I need help." "We're sending paramedics to your location right now," the operator said. "Stay on the line with me." The sirens arrived within minutes. 2 paramedics burst through the front door, finding me on the living room floor, where I'd managed to make my way between contractions. "Ma'am, we've got you," the older paramedic said. Her name tag read L. Rodriguez. "Let's see what we're dealing with here." They worked with swift efficiency, checking my pulse, monitoring the baby's heartbeat. The contractions were too close together for a hospital transfer. Elena Rodriguez held my hand as I bore down, her voice calm and steady through the storm. "You're doing great," she said. "I can see the head. One more push." With a final surge of effort that felt like it might split me in half, I felt the sudden release. A thin, urgent cry filled the air. "A girl," Elena announced, lifting the tiny, red-faced baby into the light. 5 pounds, 6 ounces, small but strong. I held out my arms, and she placed my daughter against my chest. The baby's skin was warm and impossibly soft, her tiny fingers curling around mine with surprising strength. "Elena," I whispered, looking at the paramedic who had stayed by my side. "Her name is Elena." My father arrived 20 minutes later, his face gray with worry that melted into wonder when he saw his granddaughter. He knelt beside me, pressing a kiss to my forehead. "You did it," he said. "You both made it." I closed my eyes, exhaustion pulling at me. But beneath the tiredness was something else. a fierce protectiveness that felt like fire in my chest. Marcus emerged from his mother's room as the paramedics packed their equipment, his face pale with what might have been embarrassment or confusion. "Is she okay?" he asked, gesturing toward the baby. "We're fine," I said, not looking at him. "Both of us." 2 days later, my phone rang in the hospital room. Marcus's name appeared on the screen. I considered letting it go to voicemail, but something compelled me to answer. "Sarah, I'm sorry," he said without preamble. I didn't know what to do. Mom said she was having chest pains, and I panicked. "And what about me?" I asked, my voice eerily calm. "I was in labor, Marcus. I told you the baby was coming, and you left me. I thought I could handle both situations. I thought there was time." "There wasn't time, there wasn't a choice, and you chose her." A long silence stretched between us. "I made a mistake," he said finally. "No," I replied. "You made a choice, and now I'm making mine." I hung up the phone and looked down at Elena, who was sleeping peacefully in my arms. My father sat in the chair beside the bed, reading a newspaper but keeping one eye on us. "You don't have to decide anything right now," he said gently. "I already have," I told him. "We're not going back to that apartment. Not to him, and definitely not to her." The next week, I met with a family law attorney named Janet Miller. Her office smelled like coffee and old leather, the walls lined with legal books and certificates. Elena slept in her carrier at my side. "The apartment is yours by inheritance," Janet explained, reviewing my paperwork. "It's separate property under state law. He has no claim to it." "What about custody?" "Given the circumstances of the birth, and if you can document the pattern of emotional manipulation, I think we can make a strong case for primary custody." I thought about all the times Vivian had dismissed my wishes, all the moments Marcus had chosen appeasement over support. What kind of documentation? Text messages, recorded conversations if you have them, witnesses to inappropriate behavior. The more evidence, the better. I went home that afternoon and began to gather my proof. Screenshots of text messages where Marcus prioritized his mother's demands over my needs. A journal I'd been keeping, documenting the daily erosions of my autonomy. Phone records showing how often Vivian called to interfere with our decisions. Within a month, I had a restraining order against Vivian and divorce papers filed against Marcus. The judge, a woman in her 50s with kind but stern eyes, listened to my testimony about being abandoned during labor. "Mrs. Chen," she said, addressing me by my maiden name, which I'd already begun using again. "Based on the evidence presented, I'm granting you full custody and ordering supervised visitation for the father." Marcus slouched in his chair across the courtroom, looking smaller than I remembered. Vivian sat beside him, her mouth pressed into a thin line of barely contained fury. "This is ridiculous," she called out. "That woman is keeping our granddaughter from us." "Ma'am, you will be silent or I will have you removed," the judge warned. It was the first time I'd ever seen Vivian rendered speechless. 6 months later, Elena and I lived in a small house my father helped me buy with money from selling the apartment. I'd finished my nursing degree and found work at a pediatric clinic. Elena grew into a curious, happy baby who laughed when I made faces at her and slept peacefully through the night. On a warm spring evening, I was pushing Elena in her stroller through the park near our house when I saw them. Marcus and Vivian sat on a bench near the playground, clearly waiting. My first instinct was to turn around, but then I looked down at my daughter, content and secure in her stroller, and I kept walking. "Sarah," Marcus called when I was close enough to hear. He stood up, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. "Please, can we talk?" Vivian remained seated, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, her eyes fixed on Elena with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "There's nothing to talk about," I said, stopping the stroller but keeping my distance. "She's my daughter too," Marcus said. "I know I made mistakes, but I want to be part of her life." "You had the chance to be part of her life," I replied. "You chose to leave us both when we needed you most." I was scared. Mom was having chest pains, and I didn't know what to do. "Your mother was fine," I said. "She was manipulating you, just like she always did, and you let her." Vivian finally spoke, her voice sharp with indignation. "How dare you accuse me of manipulation? Everything I did was to help." I looked at this woman who had controlled every aspect of my pregnancy, who had convinced my husband to prioritize her comfort over my labor, and I felt nothing but pity. "Help," I repeated. "Is that what you call it when you took away my choices? When you made me feel like a stranger in my own home? When you convinced your son to abandon his wife in labor?" "That's not what happened," Vivian protested, but her voice lacked its usual conviction. "That's exactly what happened," I said. "And it's never going to happen again." I turned the stroller around and began walking away. Behind me, I heard Marcus call my name once more, but I didn't look back. Elena gurgled happily, reaching up toward the leaves rustling in the evening breeze. 2 years later, I received a letter from Marcus's attorney, requesting modified visitation rights. Apparently, he had moved out of his mother's house and wanted to see Elena more regularly. I considered the request for exactly 1 minute before filing it in the trash. That same week, Elena took her first steps, wobbling across our living room with her arms outstretched, a huge grin on her face. My father was there to witness it, cheering louder than she was. We had built a life filled with people who celebrated her victories, instead of demanding sacrifices. Sometimes I wondered if I'd been too harsh, if I should have given Marcus another chance. But then, I would remember the feeling of being abandoned when I needed support most. The humiliation of being forced to give up my seat to someone who was perfectly capable of standing. The slow erosion of my voice in my own life. Elena deserved better than that. She deserved to grow up, knowing her worth wasn't negotiable, that her needs mattered, that the people who loved her would show up when it counted. On her second birthday, we had a small party in our backyard. My father helped her blow out the candles on her cake while I took pictures. She was everything I had hoped for, confident and curious and completely unaware that she had ever been unwanted by anyone. That evening, after my father had gone home and Elena was asleep in her crib, I sat on our front porch with a cup of tea, watching the neighborhood settle into twilight. The street was quiet except for the distant sound of children playing in another yard. A car pulled up to the curb, and my breath caught when I recognized it. Marcus got out, alone this time, and walked slowly up the sidewalk. He looked older, his hair thinner, his face drawn with an exhaustion I recognized from my own mirror during those early months of single motherhood. "Sarah," he said when he reached the bottom of the porch steps, "I know you don't want to see me." "You're right, I don't. I just wanted to tell you that I left. I moved out of Mom's house. I'm in therapy now, trying to understand how I let things get so bad." I set down my teacup and studied his face. "Good for you, but that doesn't change anything between us." "I know," he said quickly. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I understand now. What I did to you, to Elena, it was unforgivable." "Yes, it was." He nodded, as if he'd expected nothing else. "Is she happy?" "Very." "Good. That's all I wanted to know." He turned to go, then paused. "For what it's worth, I'm proud of you. For leaving, for building a life for her. You're a good mother." I watched him drive away, and for the first time since Elena's birth, I felt something like closure. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, but an acknowledgement that the chapter was truly closed. Inside, Elena stirred in her sleep, making the soft sounds that meant she was dreaming. I checked on her, smoothing her dark hair away from her face, and whispered the same words I said every night. "You are loved, you are wanted, you are enough, just as you are." She smiled in her sleep, and I knew with absolute certainty that I had made the right choice. Sometimes love means walking away. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the refusal to let them settle for less than they deserve. Elena and I had each other, and that was more than enough.